400,000 Swiss francs to spend on property in Switzerland, where would you actually get the most for your money? That is not a rhetorical question. This video answers it directly. With real towns, real prices, and the comparisons that most property coverage in this country never bothers to make. Switzerland has 26 cantons. It has 4 national languages. It has a national average property price that makes most international buyers reach for a chair before they continue reading. But it does not have one housing market. What it has is a collection of property markets so internally divergent that comparing the cheapest and most expensive regions in the same sentence can seem like a formatting error. The gap between what 400,000 Swiss francs buys in Zurich versus what it buys in the canton of Jura is not a modest variation in value. It is the difference between a parking space and a house. This script is built on 6 direct comparisons. Each one takes the same variable, a budget, a property type, or a time period, and measures it against 2 Swiss realities. Some comparisons are between regions. Some are between Switzerland and neighboring Europe. Some are between the Switzerland of 5 years ago and the Switzerland of today. Every comparison has a winner, and every winner has a reason. Comparison 1. 400,000 Swiss francs in Zurich versus 400,000 Swiss francs in Jura. Zurich is Switzerland's largest city. It is also, depending on the year and the index used, the most expensive or second most expensive city in the world for residential property. 400,000 Swiss francs in Zurich in 2026 does not buy an apartment. In most of the city's residential districts, Kreis 1 through Kreis 7, the lake-facing zones, the established residential quartiers, 400,000 Swiss francs represents a deposit on an apartment. A 10 to 15% down payment on a unit that will ultimately cost 2.5 million Swiss francs to 4 million Swiss francs to own outright. In some peripheral outer districts, Affoltern, parts of Altstetten, the far northwest zones, you might find a studio or compact one-bedroom apartment in older building stock approaching that figure on a full purchase price. Emphasis on approaching. The asking price would likely be 480,000 Swiss francs to 580,000 Swiss francs, with 400,000 Swiss francs representing the maximum contribution a typical buyer could stretch without bridging finance. The Jura, Switzerland's youngest canton in the northwest, bordering France near the cities of Basel and Bern, operates in a different pricing reality entirely. With 400,000 Swiss francs in the Jura, the question is not whether you can afford a property. The question is how much land you want it to sit on. In Delémont, the cantonal capital with a train connection to Basel in 45 minutes, 400,000 Swiss francs currently buys a detached single-family house with 4 to 5 rooms, a garden, and a garage. Not a conversion project, not a structural renovation, a habitable family home that could be occupied immediately. In the surrounding villages, Courandlin, Kourou, Develliers, the same budget extends to properties with additional outbuildings, larger land parcels, and mountain views that would retail for several million francs if they were located on the other side of the Jura mountain ridge. The winner is obvious, but the reason matters as much as the result. A Jura wins on raw purchasing power because it lacks the employment density and international brand recognition that sustains Zurich prices. That is the trade-off. The property is better. The job market, for anyone dependent on a local employer, is narrower. The gap widens when you look at what those 2 properties cost to maintain annually. Cantonal property taxes in Jura are modest by Swiss standards. The cost of living in Delémont, groceries, restaurants, local services, runs measurably below Zurich levels. The mortgage repayment on a 400,000 Swiss franc property in Jura is a fraction of the corresponding payment on a 2.8 million Swiss franc Zurich apartment. There is a further dimension that standard property comparisons rarely include: the Swiss mortgage affordability test. or Swiss banks require buyers to demonstrate that repayments would remain affordable at a theoretical 5% interest rate, regardless of the current market rate. On a 400,000 Swiss franc property in Jura, assuming a 20% deposit of 80,000 Swiss francs and a mortgage of 320,000 Swiss francs, The stress-tested monthly repayment at 5% comes to approximately 1,333 Swiss francs. That is well within reach for most dual-income households. On a 2.8 million Swiss franc Zurich apartment with the same deposit structure, a 560,000 Swiss franc deposit and a 2.24 million Swiss franc mortgage, the stress-tested repayment runs to approximately 9,333 Swiss francs per month, a figure that eliminates the vast majority of Swiss households from eligibility entirely, regardless of their actual income. This is not simply a comparison of property prices. It is a comparison of who is allowed to participate in ownership at all. Jura's price level keeps the door open for middle-income Swiss households. Zurich's price level has effectively converted ownership into an asset class for the wealthy, with the working majority converted into permanent renters by the mechanics of the affordability test. Comparison 2. Lakeview property. Geneva versus Ticino. Both cantons offer lake views. Both offer the specific combination of mountain backdrop and waterfront living that Switzerland does better than almost anywhere in the world. The price difference is approximately 300%. Geneva sits at the western tip of Europe's largest alpine lake. It is home to the United Nations European headquarters, the World Health Organization, the International Red Cross, the World Economic Forum Secretariat, and more private bank headquarters per square kilometer than any comparable city on Earth. A two-bedroom apartment with a lake view in Geneva's Eau Vive or Cologne neighborhoods currently lists between 1.4 million Swiss francs and 2.2 million Swiss francs. Three-bedroom lake view apartments in the same zones, 2.2 million Swiss francs to 3.8 million Swiss francs. These are not penthouse prices. These are mid-market prices in one of the world's most undersupplied residential markets. Ticino is Switzerland's Italian-speaking canton, sitting on the southern side of the Alps. It has Lake Lugano and Lake Maggiore, stone villages built into hillsides, palm trees and Mediterranean light, and a standard of natural scenery that is legitimately comparable to the Geneva lakefront in most objective respects. A two-bedroom apartment with a lake or significant mountain view in Lugano currently lists between 480,000 Swiss francs and 780,000 Swiss francs. In the smaller lakeside towns, Ascona, Locarno, Morcote, prices for equivalent units run 460,000 Swiss francs to 720,000 Swiss francs. These are properties with proper views, not oblique sightlines from a secondary window. Actual lake views, in well-maintained buildings, with Swiss-quality construction. The Geneva properties cost 2 to 3 times more for essentially the same sensory experience. The extra cost does not buy you better views. It is buying you proximity to a specific labor market and the social infrastructure that surrounds it. Ticino has the highest unemployment rate of any Swiss canton. Local wages run 20 to 30% below the Swiss national average. For a buyer dependent on Ticino employment, the cheaper Lakeview apartment comes with a material income risk. While that was true in Geneva once, a generation ago, the compounding of international institutional demand has made the Geneva labor market structurally insulated from normal economic cycles in a way that Ticino's is not. The verdict: Ticino wins on price per square meter of Lakeview by a factor of 2 to 3. Geneva wins for buyers whose income depends on proximity to a deep, internationally anchored labor market. Comparison 3. 300,000 Swiss francs. What you get across 4 cantons. 300,000 Swiss francs is an important figure in Swiss property. It is approximately the threshold below which buying in the major Swiss cities becomes effectively impossible, and above which buying in the cheapest Swiss cantons opens up a genuinely interesting range of options. In Basel-Stadt, Switzerland's smallest canton by area, the city at the Rhine bend where Germany, France, and Switzerland meet, 300,000 Swiss francs in 2026 buys a small studio or compact one-bedroom apartment in an older building in an outer neighborhood. No guaranteed parking, no outdoor space. Possibly some renovation is required, functional, but minimal. In the canton of Valais, the long alpine valley in southern Switzerland that runs east from Verbier and Zermatt through to the working towns of the Upper Valais. 300,000 Swiss francs buys a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment in a town like Visp or Brig, both connected to the national rail network, both with full public service infrastructure, and both sitting at the foot of one of the most dramatic mountain landscapes in Europe. In Appenzell Ausserrhoden, the half-canton in northeastern Switzerland, ours an hour from Zurich and known for its traditional wooden farmhouse architecture and its quietly independent character, 300,000 Swiss francs buys an entry-level family house in a village setting. Not large, not new, but a house with 4 walls, a roof that belongs to you, and enough outdoor space that you can sit outside in summer. In Jura, 300,000 Swiss francs buys all of that, and then some. A 4-room house with a garden in Porrentruy, a 3-bedroom farmhouse needing some renovation in Seignelay-Gier. Properties with land, with storage, with the kind of spatial generosity that urban Swiss buyers spend entire careers saving to approach. Compare that with what 300,000 Swiss francs does in Zurich, Geneva, or Zug, approximately nothing of substance. A deposit, at best. In a waiting list position for a property that will cost 4 to 8 times that figure to purchase outright. The pattern across these 4 cantons is consistent. The further from the major economic centers, the more property 300,000 Swiss francs commands. The trade-off in every case is employment access and international amenity proximity. The question is how much those things are worth to you specifically. And that calculation looks different for every buyer. One additional layer is worth adding to this 4-canton comparison: the direction of change. In Basel Stadt, 300,000 Swiss francs buys roughly the same small studio today that it bought 5 years ago, because the price floor has held firm while upper-end growth has been more dramatic. In Valais and Appenzell, 300,000 Swiss francs buys slightly less than it did in 2019, as secondary market appreciation has compressed the value proposition modestly. In Jura, 300,000 Swiss francs buys slightly more value in absolute property terms than it did in 2019, because supply has remained steady and demand growth has been limited. The directional data matters because it signals where the relative value opportunity sits at this moment in time, rather than in the abstract. And at this moment, the Jura, Uri, and Glarus represent the best-preserved version of the accessible Swiss property market that existed more broadly in the mid-2000s. Comparison 4. The same property, 2019 versus 2026. Swiss property prices have not been static over the last 7 years. They have been on a sustained upward trajectory that has compressed affordability across almost every canton. Take a reference point property. A 4-room, in mid-century detached house in a secondary Swiss town. Not a city, not a resort destination, but a functioning cantonal town with rail access and basic services. Call it a house in Glarus, in Liestal, in Basel Landschaft, in Olten in Solothurn, or in Arbonne in Thurgau. In 2019, these properties were trading in a range of 380,000 Swiss francs to 520,000 Swiss francs depending on condition and specific location. They were affordable for a dual-income middle-class Swiss household with a reasonable savings base. In 2026, the same category of property in the same towns is trading between 560,000 Swiss francs and 720,000 Swiss francs. That represents price appreciation of approximately 35 to 40% over 7 years. Not in Zurich, where comparable appreciation is even steeper, but in the secondary towns that were supposed to represent the accessible part of the Swiss market. While that was true in 2019, that secondary Swiss towns offered a genuine middle market entry point, it is considerably less true today. The pandemic-era demand surge for space, combined with the reference interest rate cycle and the normalization of working outside city centers, brought buying pressure into secondary markets that previously operated in relative isolation from city center price dynamics. The gap between 2019 and 2026 is not uniformly bad news for buyers. For anyone who purchased in 2018 or 2019 in a secondary Swiss town, the appreciation has been substantial. But for anyone entering the market now, the accessible entry point that secondary towns represented 7 years ago has shifted meaningfully upward, making the genuinely cheap cantons like Jura, Uri, and Glarus the new frontier that secondary towns used to occupy. The drivers of that shift are worth naming clearly. The Swiss National Bank maintained negative interest rates from 2015 through to 2022, an extended period in which the cost of mortgage capital was historically low, stimulating purchasing activity across all market segments, including the secondary towns that had previously been insulated from city center demand dynamics. The pandemic added a second wave of pressure, as the sudden premium placed on living space pushed buyers and renters into markets they had not previously considered. The combination of cheap money and pandemic-driven spatial preference produced a convergence effect. Markets that had been cheap because they were overlooked became somewhat less cheap as they were noticed. The reversal of the interest rate environment from 2022 onward, as the SNB moved to positive rates and then to cuts, has not meaningfully restored affordability in secondary towns because the supply of properties available at pre-2020 prices has not recovered. Sellers who bought at 2019 prices have no incentive to sell at 2019 prices in 2026. The floor moved, and it has not moved back. Comparison 5. Switzerland versus Southern Germany. For the same budget, 400,000 Swiss francs spent on property 10 minutes across the Swiss border into the German state of Baden-Württemberg produces a dramatically different outcome. The area around Freiburg im Breisgau, one of southern Germany's most desirable university cities, approximately 40 minutes by car from Basel, currently has a median apartment price of around 3,500 euros to 5,000 euros per square meter. A 400,000 Swiss francs at current exchange rates buys approximately 80 to 100 square meters in a reasonable Freiburg neighborhood. A comfortable two-bedroom apartment in a mid-market area of a genuinely attractive German city. In Munich, Germany's most expensive residential market, located 2.5 hours from Zurich by train, prices run 8,000 euros to 12,000 euros per square meter in central neighborhoods. 400,000 Swiss francs buys 35 to 50 square meters. A studio. The comparison with Zurich becomes approximately equivalent at this price level. But the cheap Swiss cantons versus southern Germany comparison runs differently. 400,000 Swiss francs in the Jura versus 400,000 Swiss francs in the Black Forest region of Baden-Württemberg, or in rural Bavarian towns like Landsberg am Lech or Kaufbeuren. The properties are broadly similar in size and quality. What the Swiss version offers additionally is Swiss infrastructure, the reliability of public transport, the quality of the healthcare system, the school environment, the civic stability. At no additional price premium because, in these cantons, the Swiss premium simply has not been priced in to the same degree as it has in the major cities. The gap widens when you factor in the Swiss francs' long-term strength against the euro. A property purchased in the Jura in 2020 in Swiss francs has appreciated in Swiss franc terms and has simultaneously gained value against the euro. For an international buyer whose wealth or income is denominated in euros, that dual appreciation effect is significant. Compare that with what 400,000 Swiss francs spent inside Switzerland but outside the major cities actually delivers, and the Swiss side of the comparison begins to look more competitive than it first appears. The Jura farmhouse and the Freiburg apartment are roughly comparable in absolute floor area at that budget. But the Swiss property comes with access to what is widely considered the world's most stable currency, the world's most reliable public infrastructure, and a healthcare system that regularly ranks in the global top 5. Those are not intangible benefits. They are concrete features of daily life that carry real financial value in healthcare costs, infrastructure reliability, and the long-term preservation of purchasing power. The cross-border comparison is not simply a price comparison. It is a value comparison. And Switzerland's cheap cantons perform better on that composite measure than their headline prices suggest. My comparison 6. Appenzell versus Zug. Same country, opposite trajectories. Both are small cantons, both are scenic, Both are within a reasonable distance of Zurich. Zug and Appenzell Innerrhoden could not be more different in property terms. Zug, the 239 square kilometer tax haven south of Zurich, has become one of Switzerland's 3 most expensive residential markets. The mechanism is well documented. The lowest cantonal and municipal tax rates in the country have attracted a sustained flow of high-earning individuals, crypto sector companies, commodity traders, and corporate holding structures. Residential property in central Zug now trades at 18,000 Swiss francs to 22,000 Swiss francs per square meter. A 90 square meter apartment, 1.6 million Swiss francs to 2.0 million Swiss francs. But the tax saving for a high earner in Zug versus Geneva runs to 50,000 Swiss francs to 90,000 Swiss francs annually, which means the premium on Zug property is, for the right buyer, entirely rational. Appenzell Innerrhoden, the other half canton in the northeastern corner of the country with 16,000 residents and no tax arbitrage story, has done the opposite. Prices there have barely moved in a decade. Renovated farmhouses with gardens in the villages around Appenzell town trade between 380,000 Swiss francs and 560,000 Swiss francs. The same category of property in the same villages was selling at 340,000 Swiss francs to 490,000 Swiss francs in 2015. The divergence between these two cantons captures something fundamental about what drives Swiss property prices. It is not primarily scenery, which both cantons have in abundance. It is not primarily infrastructure, and which both cantons access through reasonable rail connections to Zurich. It is not history or culture. It is economics, the specific, concentrated, self-reinforcing economic logic that makes some places worth more to more people, regardless of the intrinsic qualities of the land and buildings themselves. Zug wins on price appreciation. Appenzell wins on absolute affordability. The choice between them depends on whether you are trying to optimize a financial return or find a place to live that costs a fraction of what the Swiss market ordinarily demands. The Appenzell case also illustrates something that the Zug case obscures. There is a version of Switzerland where the property market has not fully participated in the national price surge of the last decade. Appenzell Innerrhoden is not unique in this regard. Several smaller cantons, Glarus, Uri, Nidwalden, the rural parts of Graubünden, have experienced property price growth that is meaningful in percentage terms, but modest in absolute figures compared to the cities. The divergence between Zug and Appenzell is, in this sense, a microcosm of the entire Swiss property landscape. One canton has been turbocharged by economic logic and capital flows. The other has been left largely outside that logic, not as a failure, but as a consequence of simply not being what the turbocharged capital is looking for. For buyers who are themselves not looking for what the turbocharged capital is looking for, who want a house in Switzerland at a price that does not require extraordinary wealth or extraordinary mortgage leverage, Appenzell and its equivalents are not a consolation prize, and they are the actual opportunity. While that opportunity remains available, which, given the directional signals in the market, may not be indefinitely, the comparison with Zug makes the choice unusually clear. One path leads to 2 million Swiss francs for a 90 square meter apartment in a 30,000 person town that happens to have low taxes. The other leads to 450,000 Swiss francs for a farmhouse with a view of the Alps in a 16,000 person canton that happens to have been overlooked. Both are in Switzerland. Only one of them is accessible. The numbers in these 6 comparisons are not selected for impact. They are drawn from current market listings and documented cantonal data. The patterns they reveal are stable and structural rather than anecdotal or cyclical. These 6 comparisons point toward a consistent conclusion. Now, Switzerland's property market rewards research disproportionately. The marginal buyer who knows only Geneva and Zurich is not paying a modest premium for that limited knowledge. They are paying, in some cases, 3 to 4 times more than the buyer who has taken the time to understand what the full Swiss market actually contains. The difference between a buyer who knows only Zurich and Geneva and a buyer who has looked at the full cantonal landscape is not a marginal difference in price. It is the difference between an inaccessible market and an accessible one. Jura, Uri, Glarus, Appenzell, the Upper Valais, These are not compromises. They are alternatives. For the right buyer with the right circumstances, they represent access to the Swiss quality of life at a fraction of the headline price. The infrastructure works. The trains run. The property exists and is listed. The question is not whether these markets are real. The question is whether the buyer in front of the screen is willing to look past the two postcodes that dominate every conversation about Swiss real estate. If you want this channel to run the same comparison analysis for a specific region, a specific budget, or a specific property type, that is exactly what Urban Wealth Atlas does every week.